the Music Theory Lady.
Hi guys, welcome back to the Music Theory Lady. Today we're talking major key signatures. Why do we have major key signatures or key signatures at all? If you're a composer and you're wanting to write a piece in a certain key, you're going to have accidentals that you add to notes, and every time you have that note, you're going to have to add the accidental every single time, and it gets rather time consuming. So we have key signatures that allow us to put a certain pattern of sharps or flats there for the musician to see, so that they know every single time that we have a note with that accidental marked at the start of the piece, every single time we have that note from there on out, it's going to have that accidental without the composer having to write that accidental every single time. So it's kind of putting some of the responsibility on the musician who's reading the music to be able to understand when they need to apply those accidentals appropriately. So we're gonna build key signatures today and talk about how to do that. We're gonna start with the sharps. So if you notice here, I have a grand staff. I've got a treble clef and a bass clef. So we're going to show it in both clefs for you. And we're going to start with the very first key signature that has 0 sharps and 0 flats. And that is the key of C major. And if you look at your scales, my students, for instance, have rapid fire scale sheets that they're looking at where they have every single major scale written down. That's kind of where we pull our accidentals from. So if you're looking at the scale of C major, you know it has no sharps and flats. So technically right here as it stands, that is the key signature of C major because there are no sharps and flats in it. So I'm going to draw a vertical line to separate it from my next key signature. And truly, if you see no sharps or flats, it is the key signature of C. The next one we're going to talk about is the key of G. The key of G has 1 sharp, and it's F sharp if you're looking at your rapid fire scales for my students. And that's going to go up here on this F5 in treble clef or on this F3 in bass clef. Notice those are actually on Fs, but even though in treble clef it's way up here on F5, any F that I come across in treble clef is going to need to have that sharp applied. Same for this F sharp in the bass clef. Every single F I come across the bass clef, even if it's not F3, will have that sharp applied to it. All right, next one. That's right, only 1 sharp in the key of G. If we look at this major scale of D, we'll see we have 2 sharps. Those 2 sharps are F sharp and C sharp. We've already dealt with a key signature that has an F sharp in it, so it's going to stay right at the start. We're going to go ahead and put that F sharp right where we know it goes. And then we're going to add that C sharp. In treble clef, that sharp goes on the 3rd space, or C5. In bass clef, that sharp goes on the 2nd space, or C2. Sorry, C3. It's on C3. So this is the key signature of D major. It has 2 sharps. Again, we started with the F sharp that we already knew, and then we moved to the C sharp. Okay, vertical line to separate that. By the way, as we go through this, we really want to try to make sure we're keeping track of the order of sharps that we're using. And what I mean by that is when we had 1 sharp, it was F sharp. When we had 2 sharps, they're still in order, F and then C. My 3rd key is going to be A major. If you look at the A major scale, you see there are 3 sharps. F sharp that we've already done, C sharp that we've already done, and G sharp is the new one. So since we already know where F and C go on the staff, let's go ahead and put them there. And then we're going to add G sharp. In treble clef, G sharp actually gets placed on this G just above the staff. That's G5. In bass clef, it goes on this 4th space, which is G3. So again, we're keeping track of our order of sharps. So now we have F sharp, C sharp, and then G sharp is what we're going to add. Next key is based off the major scale of E. The major scale of E has 4 sharps. It has 3 of them that we've already done, F, C, and G. And the new sharp we're adding is D sharp. So let's go ahead and put those 3 sharps that we already know where they go. And then we're going to add D sharp. D sharp in treble clef goes on the 4th line D, or D5. And in bass clef goes on D3, or the 3rd line. So now we're going to add that to our order of sharps, F, C, G, D. Draw yourself a vertical line. Okay, now we're going to do the key signature of B. By the way, I just did all of the rest of the sharp keys and then realized it all went off the screen. So you can maybe see some ghost lines here. I tried to go back and erase, so hopefully that doesn't throw you off too much. Okay, so in the key signature of B, I have 5 sharps. The first 4 are the ones we've already placed on the staff. That's F sharp, C sharp, G sharp, D sharp, and now we're gonna add A sharp. So go ahead and place the 4 that you know where they go. And then we're going to add A sharp. A sharp in treble clef goes on the second space, or A4. In bass clef, it goes on the first space, or A2. And draw a vertical line to separate. Okay, now we're going to do the key signature of F sharp major. And I want to stop here and talk about, if you notice the rest of the keys that have sharps in them, we call them just by their letter name. So we don't say it's the key of G sharp just because it has sharps in the key signature. It's the key signature of G. And that's because that key signature comes directly from the major scale of G. So I'm going to call it G because when I build a scale, I'm going to start it on the G as opposed to starting it on G sharp. If I were to start the scale on G sharp, it would be a completely different scale with a completely different set of accidentals for the key signature. So G, D, A, E, and B are all key signatures and scales that only have a letter that represents their name. When we get past B in the sharp key signatures, now we're going to start with keys that actually have sharp in the name. And the reason for that is when you build a scale on F sharp, you're actually starting that scale on F sharp. You're not starting it on F and then it magically has sharps in it. You're starting that scale on F sharp. And that's why it gets the name of a key signature as F sharp. Have I said sharp enough? Okay. Now it's got 6 sharps in F sharp. We've already dealt with the first 5, F, C, G, D, A. We're going to add E sharp. So let's go ahead and place the 5 we already know. Okay, now we're going to add E sharp. In treble clef, it goes on the 4th space, which is E5, and in bass clef, it goes on the 3rd space, which is E3. All right, draw a line. Now we're going to do the final sharp key signature, that's C sharp. It has 7 sharps. That's the absolute most sharps you can have in a key signature. It has F, C, G, D, A, and E, and then we're going to add B sharp. Oh, and I forgot about our order of sharps up here. So far we've had F, C, G, D. After that we added A sharp, and after A sharp we added E sharp, and then I told you we're just going to add B sharp. So let's go ahead and look at what those are on the staff. Go ahead and place the first 6. You know where they go. And then we're going to place the last sharp, B sharp, which goes on the 3rd line in treble clef, or B4, and on the 2nd line in bass clef, or B2. So these are all of the different key signatures you can have that have sharps in them. Again, they are in order: G, D, A, E, B, F sharp, and C sharp. And C sharp is called C sharp for the same reason that F sharp was, because remember we talked about you're going to actually start the major scale on that note. That's different, very different from the key of C, which has no sharps or flats. And then we have C sharp, which has all of the sharps that you can have. And if we go back to our order of sharps, you need to know that it's going to be this order every single time. You're always going to start with F sharp. You can see we always started with F. It's always going to go to C sharp next. You can see it did that. Going to go to G sharp next. It did that every time. So it will always maintain the same order. So it's important to have this order of sharps known. And there's a mnemonic device for it where you can say fat cats go down alleys eating birds. I have kids who sometimes change that up and make up their own thing. I'm all for making up your own acronym that helps you to remember it better. That's just the one that I was taught. So again, that's fat cats go down alleys eating birds. And not only will the order of sharps always be the same, but their placement on the staff will always be the same, meaning the F sharp will always in treble clef be placed up here on this top line. In bass clef, the F sharp will always be placed on the 4th line. You're never going to see those sharps in different places on the staff. It's always going to take this shape. And so I always talk to my students about possibly trying to figure out some sort of pattern to remember so that you know what the order they are on the staff. So for instance, if we look at where we have all the sharps, you can either say I like to say it starts on F sharp and then it goes down, up, down, kind of like you can think of it up and down directionally. I've also had a student in the past who said he could see like 2 diamonds drawn in between with the D sharp being the center. So whatever pattern it is that you want to use to memorize this, but you need to have these memorized because I have students who draw them incorrectly every year. And the truth is, this is a standard. It's a set standard in music theory. You're never going to see these key signatures drawn any other way when it comes to drawing them in treble and bass clef. So make sure you have that known and memorized to be able to duplicate later. All right, so now we're going to talk about flat keys. Again, if you're looking at your rapid fire sheet for my students, or if you're at home learning this from my videos and you can look at some reference that has all of the major scales on it, we're going to start with a major scale that has 1 flat, and that major scale is a scale of F. And F has 1 flat, and that's B flat. So in treble clef, we're gonna draw that B flat on the 3rd line, or B4. In bass clef, it's gonna go on the 2nd line, or B2. And that's it for the key of F. But just like in sharps, we kept track of our order of sharps, we're gonna need to keep track of our order of flats here, because it will always be the same. So our order of flats so far are B flat. Our next key is the key of B flat. It has 2 flats, B flat and E flat. We already know where B flat goes, so go ahead and place that on the staff. And then E flat in treble clef goes on this 4th space, or E5. In bass clef, it goes on this 3rd space, or E3. So now we can add that E flat to our pattern. The next key is the key of E flat. It has 3 flats, B flat, E flat, and A flat. So we're going to place those first 2 that we already know. Then we'll add A flat, which in treble clef goes on the 2nd space, or A4. In bass clef, it goes on this 1st space, or A2. So we'll add that flat to our order of flats. Next one is the key of A flat. Let me stop here for just a second and talk about, if you notice, we had 1 key so far that has flats in it that actually has no flat in the name. Just like we were talking about with sharps, that name of the key signature comes from the scale that it's based on. So when I build the scale of F, I'm starting the scale on F, and that whole and half step pattern creates 1 flat in the scale, which is B flat. All of the rest, and I'm kind of spoiling this here, but all of the rest of your flat keys will actually have flat in the name. But to clarify, it doesn't have flat in the name because it's a key that has flats. It has flat in the name because if I were to build the major scale off of that note, I would build it off of, in this case, B flat. I'd build it off of E flat. I'd build it off of A flat, so on and so forth. So again, you're going to have to figure out and memorize what keys in flats have flat in the name and which ones don't. And the really easy thing is F is the only one that doesn't have flat in the name. All of the rest of your flat keys actually have flat in the name. So A flat has 4 flats. We already have the first 3, B, E, A. We're going to add D flat in this one. Now we're going to add D flat. D flat in treble clef goes on the 4th line, or D5. In bass clef, it goes on the 3rd line, or D3. Okay, go ahead and draw a line. Add that flat, so we had B, E, A, D. We're going to add that to our order of flats. Okay, now we're going to do the key of D flat. D flat has 5 flats, B, E, A, and D. We're going to add G flat. So start with your first 4. And then G flat in treble clef goes on the 2nd line, or G4. In bass clef, it goes on the 1st line, or G2. Draw a vertical line. We'll add our flat over here, B, E, A, D, G. Now we're going to have the key of G flat. G flat has 6 flats, B, E, A, D, G. Sorry, B, E, A, D, G, yeah. And then we're going to add C flat to that. So draw your first 5. Then we're going to add C flat. In treble clef, it goes on the 3rd space, or C5. In bass clef, it goes on the 2nd space, or C3. Draw a vertical line. add our flat, B, E, A, D, G, C. So we'll add that over here. And our last key is the key of C flat. C flat has all flats. B, E, A, D, G, C, and F is what we're going to add. So go ahead and draw the first 6. And then we'll add F flat. In treble clef, it's going to go on the first space, or F4. In bass clef, it's going to actually go just below the staff on this F, way down here, that's F2. So this is now all of the flats you can possibly have. Again, it's a set standard of where those flats go on the staff. Not only do you have to know the order of flats, B, E, A, D, G, C, F, but you also have to know the placement on the staff. And again, I typically teach it as you start on B flat and then you just go up, down, up, down, up, down. No, I think that's it. I think that's the only pattern I've ever seen. If you've got a pattern, feel free to let me know. But I believe that's typically the pattern that we go with because it kind of just stays the same all the way through. Up, down, up, down, up, down. It's really nice and easy. Let's talk about this order of flats right here. We've got B, E, A, D, G, C, F. Obviously, the first 4 letters spell out a word, bead. And then you can either just remember it as B, G, C, F. I have people who call it bead, greatest common factor, bead, gross cafeteria food. There's a lot of them out there. Again, feel free to make up your own. I do recommend having a system for memorizing your order of sharps and your order of flats, but I will show you a trick, and the trick is that the order of sharps are actually a backwards pattern of the order of flats. So you've got F here, and then C, and then G, and then D, and then A, and E, and B. Notice that their placement on the staff isn't backwards, but the actual order of them is backwards of one another, which is an interesting thing. But I do encourage you, and I encourage my students too, don't just memorize it as, oh, I'm going to memorize it one way, and then just know that it's backwards the other way, because inevitably somebody ends up misspelling something. And so I recommend really memorizing sharps, fat cats go down alleys eating birds, and flats, bead, GCF. Now we're going to talk a little bit about notation clarity specifically for my students. I'm a pretty big stickler on notation clarity. If you notice throughout here, I tried really hard to keep all of my flats and sharps directly where they're supposed to be on the staff. If it's got a line going through it, you can clearly see a line going through the center. If it doesn't have a line going through it, you can clearly tell it's supposed to be a sharp on the space or a flat on a space. Notice I don't have any crossover on these ones that are on spaces into the lines that are surrounding it. When I'm talking about notation clarity on flats, I'm really mostly talking about just the little belly of the B. Notice that's not crossing over any lines. Same here. Pretty much any of these I think you could find. Maybe that one's a little close to the line, but most of them stay within the lines. Sharps, it's that little square in the center, and so if you notice, it's staying right in the center of that space. There's no line going through that center, no line going through that center, so on and so forth. But the other thing with key signatures that you have to keep track of with notation clarity is what I call the paper test. And the paper test is where if I were to drag a piece of paper across my written paper here, I would only see one sharp at a time in a staff. So if I'm just looking at treble clef here, I've got one sharp, I pull it again, I've got another sharp, I pull it again, I've got another sharp. I can very clearly see which sharp is first and second and third on the staff. Same with flats. If I do the paper test, let's do it with bass clef on this one. So I can do one flat at a time, one flat at a time, one flat at a time. So if I pull that paper across your paper and I see more than one flat or sharp at a time, that's trouble. I can't tell you the number of times I've seen a key signature in the past that looks like this, where if I were to pull a piece of paper across, let's make it nice and big so you can really see it. If I were to pull that paper across, you definitely see there's no way for me to get all the way past one sharp and still only see one sharp. All the way past, and I've got all these sharps that are sort of overlapping each other when I do this. So again, the goal is to be able to see all of one sharp without seeing any part of the next sharp. And as you can see here, they're all overlapping each other quite a bit. Whereas on my work up here, you can see there's definitely clearly the end of one sharp before I start another, before I start another, before I start another, so on and so forth. So watch out for that notation clarity for my students. It will cost you. Otherwise, I hope this helped you learn how to write key signatures. Next time, we're going to be learning how to read key signatures and understand them just based on sight. So we'll see you guys next time. Thanks for watching. Bye-bye.